Welcome into the Thunder Basketball Universe presented by Coop Ale Works. We're continuing in this off-season feature series that we've got going on. And if you look on OKCThunder.com right now, there are 2 new feature stories that you should read. You definitely should read. We're recording this on Monday, August 22nd. And so there are a couple of feature stories that are up right now on Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara and Usman Dieng. And those feature stories are written by our very own Nick Gallo right here, who's been doing some awesome work on the feature beat all summer long.
Well, I had a major assist from the one and only Paris Lawson, who did these wonderful sit-down one-on-one interviews with the guys out in Las Vegas during Summer League. You'll see the video versions of these interviews as well on OKCThunder.com and our @OKCThunder social channels. And so my job was kind of, how do I take this great content that we got, these 10, 15-minute long interviews, and be able to tell like a little bit more of a full form story and really get a chance to introduce these guys to the Thunder fan base. 4 new rookies that have come in to the organization. Most people, knew Chet Holmgren was kind of a household name, but the other 3 guys, they maybe need a little bit more of an introduction to the fan base.
And we have been able to dive really deep into their stories between the 10, 15 minutes I got to sit down with them at Summer League. And for those of you who have done interviews before or like have been interviewed before, talking about yourself, you can only give so much of the story. So Nick did a fantastic job of going and getting a couple of outside sources to help round out some of these features. And if you read or saw the Jalen Williams feature that was out first on OKCThunder.com, you'll see what I'm talking about.
This is Jay Will, and you're right. I mean, guys don't often pat themselves on the back that much, but they also don't always remember these like crucial anecdotes that from somebody else's perspective maybe define who they are. And there's sometimes where other people might know you a little bit better than you know yourself. And that's kind of where some of these additional interviews have really come to help out. You mentioned Jay Will. His high school coach told me this great story, as we talked about, I think, last week, about how during the state championship, Jay Will was the tallest guy, biggest guy on the floor. His team was kind of dealing with this opponent that they had lost to twice during the regular season that employed this full court press. And at halftime, the high school coach says to Jay Will, "I've got 5 timeouts in the second half and they're all yours." And basically put him in charge of breaking the press as the point guard at 6'10", 240 pounds, So This is a guy who then went on to University of Arkansas, and I was able to do a little bit of digging too about how even while he was at Arkansas, after one of his very first great games that he had there, he made a call back to one of his coaches at the Boys and Girls Club that really meant a lot to him. And so we've got this great imagery that came from Jalen of him as a kid playing at the Boys and Girls Club.
It's so good.
Oh, I mean, some of these pictures, you're just like,
and it's the same smile.
Yeah,
the same smile carries over year to year.
He has such an engaging personality that you can just feel viscerally. It pops out of a photo. It pops off the screen when you're watching him on TV, and it definitely will show on the floor at Paycom Center. So it was really cool to be able to dig a little bit more. And, same thing can be said about the J-Dub piece and then the Usman piece. I'm going to have to tease this a little bit.
Okay.
I got an additional interview from one of Usman Dieng's coaches with the New Zealand Breakers, but that interview came in after publication of that article. So I'm actually going to hold on to that. And I'm going to have to, just leave you guys wanting a little bit more. And I'm going to hold on to that. And because there's some really cool anecdotes that I got in that interview as well. And we'll save that for sometime down the line as maybe we get into training camp or preseason or something. And Usman's a little bit more top of mind for everybody.
Bottom line is OKCThunder.com. There's some really high level reporting happening here that there's information you just can't get anywhere else. So you know where to go for that awesome intel. All right, we're going to get into Usman and we're going to get into J-Dub a little bit later in the podcast. But before we get into that, there was something that happened this past week that caught our attention. And once again, we're going north of the border. We're going back to Canada. Last week, we were talking about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and how he hosted his first ever camp in Toronto. This week, it was Lou Dort hosting his second annual Lou the Beast camp.
Just a little bit further to the northeast.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It turned out a really great show out. A lot of young kids. And we all know Lou's story growing up in Montreal Nord and how he really wants to give back to that community and help out, because we've seen the talent that comes out of there. We've got Lou Dort from Montreal. We've got Shea from Hamilton, Ontario. There is talent out there. And so they want to be able to provide the same opportunities to kids that were just like them.
Yeah, Lou remembers, riding the train to go from his part of town to a different part to just go to the type of basketball training that he needed to become eventually a pro athlete. And it seems like just from this camp, which was free to the public, Lou's really all about trying to bring the opportunity to kids that might not otherwise get it. And that's a huge thing when you think about people reaching back. It's not just, to pump up their own ego or to, create this like elite space for kids that might already be able to get those types of opportunities. Lou's really trying to reach back to the kids that wouldn't be able to get this type of chance to play in an organized setting, to learn from an NBA player otherwise.
And when he says learn from NBA players, there was a hands-on element to this too. There were a few kids that got to do the one-on-one, and I feel like every NBA player gives the kids in their camp this opportunity to play one-on-one with them. But I'm not playing offense against Lou Dort.
No, thank you.
I will only specifically defend Lou Dort.
I'm not willingly walking into the torture chamber. I'm very sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm going to go get a snack now.
Some hands-on experience there. But one other thing that caught our eye, Mike Muscala paid a visit to the camp.
A pop-in.
How about that?
What a nice little summer pop-in.
Yeah.
That's so great. And I'm sure a wonderful time to be in Montreal.
I mean, seriously, this time of year, I hear good things.
We had a videographer, team photographer on the ground there, got lots of great content up in Montreal. Just we love being able to track these Thunder players throughout the course of the off season. It is a 12-month sport, 365 days, and so there's always something going on in the Thunder basketball universe.
That's why you keep it locked here on the TBU and at OKC Thunder on all social channels. That's where you're going to be able to find all of that content from that Lou the Beast camp. All right, we're going to take a short break here, and when we come back, we're talking Usman and J-Dub.
Coop Ale Works is the proud sponsor of Thunder Basketball Universe. Brewers of the fan favorites F5 IPA and 99-calorie Ice Chest IPA. You'll find those and many more Coop beers at retailers across Oklahoma. Learn more at coopaleworks.com.
Let's get into these two feature stories that are now out on OKCThunder.com. We're going to start with, before we do that, these two guys, Usman and J-Dub, have one thing in particular in common that has stuck out to me since the minute I interviewed them in Las Vegas, and that's the age they both started to play basketball.
This was age 4?
4 years old.
Age 4. That's
both
right,
of them in their interviews with me were like, I picked it up at around 4. And I'm like, okay.
So all you parents out there, just know that that's like the prime window, I guess, to get that little Fisher-Price hoop and get it rocking.
There's never too early, never too soon. Just put a basketball in the cradle. Why not? Okay. So that was the one thing that stuck out to me. But let's dive into J-Dub here for a second, because the title of this story that you put out is called The Drive and Rise. And I think that is a perfect summarization of J-Dub, because I love his story so much. It's all about just pushing through obstacles, barriers, adversity, being underrated, and just his and all the while he had this quiet confidence about him. I know who I am assured in what I can bring to the table, and I'm going to perform.
I think about the quote a lot when I think about J-Dub that Sam Presti said, which is, he beat down the door on his way to this NBA opportunity. This is a guy that was not on NBA draft radars, definitely not on lottery radars back this time last year. Yeah. He wasn't on any major college radars. He was only recruited by 3 different schools. Yep. He was recruited as a 6-foot point guard. Yeah. He was barely on his high school team's radar because he was 5'7" as a freshman. So, I mean, this is a guy who has continued to knock down the hurdles, as you said, and he's been relentless in his quest, and he's had that confidence in a lot of different facets. One, I'm gonna grow. I mean, it was the massive feat that he had even when he was 5'10" as a sophomore in high school that led people to think this guy's not gonna just stay a 6-foot point guard heading into college. And it's true. He ended up rising all the way to 6'6", but kept the guard skills, and that's been transformative. Once he got to college, it was navigating COVID issues and having just such a strange career. The guy is a rare type in college basketball these days, where with 3 kind of wacky seasons, he stayed at Santa Clara all 3 years. I'm sure he could have transferred at some point. I'm sure he could have had some sort of issues, but it's why I really wanted to talk to his head coach at Santa Clara, Herb Sendek, and the assistant coach that recruited him, Jason Ludwig, because what drew a guy like Jalen Williams to stay at Santa Clara for those 3 years, and in the course of staying, take himself from a 6-foot point guard who really had no path to professionalism to the number 12 pick in the NBA draft.
A lottery pick.
Yes, yeah.
And that happened very late in the draft process, or the pre-draft process. If you remember, Sam Presti mentioned he was a guy that popped up late in our pre-draft kind of, scouting and evaluations. It wasn't until after the the combine was really where he shined through. And this was an element to J-Dub's story that really raised a lot of eyebrows because, like you mentioned, he wasn't on a lot of draft boards, but and just to add a little bit of context around the combine, right? It's 2 days, and the first day is mainly the measurements and the first chance to be able to play 5-on-5 against other prospects. That's really where a lot of the action happens. Day 2, it kind of drops off, right?
Yeah.
The lottery prospects decide not to play anymore.
They don't participate in things. Yeah,
they
exactly.
choose to sit out. The job is basically done, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Like you've done what you needed to do. So there's not normally a lot of action on that second day. But J-Dub said, I'm here. I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity and I'm going to play. And he balled out.
Not only did he ball out, but some of the physical characteristics just shined through more than anything. I want to get some of these numbers correct. Obviously, the 7'2" wingspan for a guy that's 6'6" that can do a little bit of everything on the floor is amazing. But he also, and that was the longest wingspan for any guard who participated. He also came in second in standing vertical leap, 33.5 inches, the fourth in max vertical leap of 40 inches, and fourth in the 3/4 sprint at just over 3 seconds. So this is a guy that showed all of those physical tools that we ended up seeing at Summer League, some of those dunks that would just like sneak up on people.
Right.
And so, combining that with this very unique personality that he has, he definitely beats to his own drum. I really learned that he's sort of a spitting image of his mother in that regard. Both his mom and his dad actually were in the Air Force and have since moved on to different things in the Phoenix area. So I also called his high school coach at Perry High, Sam Duane. And sorry, I caught you on the golf course, Coach Duane. I apologize, but you did give me an incredible piece of intel, which was at the same day that I called Coach Duane, J-Dub, Jalen Williams, was actually at his old high school, Perry High, at 5:30 in the morning.
Of course he was.
Banging on the door. And one of the great little quips is Coach Duane told me, that's Jalen Williams. He's going to find a way to get into a gym. And it made me think like he's found his way into an NBA gym too.
Let's talk about this a little bit more because I think this drive, this persistence, this not going to let anything or anyone tell me what I can or can't do mentality shine so big in Santa Clara.
Yes, for sure.
And this was the time of year or the time in our lives. The pandemic was, raging full force. Santa Clara wasn't allowed to play in their home gym for about the first 2 or 3 months of their season. So they had no home games. They were actually practicing out of the Santa Cruz Warriors G League facility.
Crazy. For
a long period of time. Jalen said that they missed Christmases and Thanksgivings. They were all just had to quarantine together as a team. So there was a lot of adversity around that team. And one anecdote in particular that I want you to get into is Jalen Williams driving to USC.
Yeah, well, Paris did a great job of pulling this out of J-Dub in the interview in Las Vegas. And I did a little bit more digging, was able to get a quick follow-up interview actually through a great coworker here at the Thunder to get J-Dub to explain why he drove 400 miles by himself from Santa Clara to Los Angeles, then Los Angeles back to Santa Clara. There's a whole COVID issue that was happening at this time during his sophomore season. Long and short of it is the Santa Clara Broncos were like scheduling games 2 or 3 days in advance of when the games were actually happening. At the last minute, they couldn't charter a flight, couldn't necessarily charter buses. They were taking like this combo of like cars and team vans down the California coast, and then once in Los Angeles, actually the USC had a rough. USC beat Santa Clara. Santa Clara had a pretty rough game. Jalen Williams had a pretty rough game, and on top of that, there was a COVID contact tracing situation that ended up being a false positive, but the result was that J-Dub had to drive the entire way back by himself. And, you think about Paris, I have to imagine if you had a 400-mile drive after one of the worst games of your collegiate career and you're in the midst of this lonely, isolated time, that would be a very difficult time for you. But I think the point of who J-Dub is that when he's been alone, when he's been isolated, when he's had to kind of figure things out himself, that's when he's really risen to the occasion, and he's come back not just a better individual player, but a better player for his team. And the back half of that sophomore year after that game, he really started to ascend. And then his junior campaign was when he really just took off in terms of becoming a prospect, becoming an elite scorer that was scoring 18 points a game extremely efficiently, and then being kind of a do-it-all guy as well. But it was really, it kind of all harkened back to that drive. And I have to imagine from your perspective, that can be a pretty formative moment.
The game that sticks out to me, and this was actually in high school, it was a state championship senior game in high school. This was the last game of my high school career. We lost in double overtime, right? But the game was in my hometown. Like, it was in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is, a suburb of Nashville. But it was in Murfreesboro, and I could leave with my parents and go home after that. And so, we lost. I didn't play well. It was the last game of my high school career. And I'm so sad, but I had my parents with me, right? Yeah. And so I could, kind of figure that out and process that. I could not imagine if that game was, in Knoxville, 3 hours away, and I would have had to drive back by myself, processing everything that just happened, And I think this really illustrates the kind of people that the Thunder, bring into their organization. People with really good heads on their shoulders and who are resilient and, just there's a lot of fortitude that goes into that, right? And it's, not just I had a bad game, we lost. It's, COVID. There's a lot to deal with that. So that's a really great anecdote for a lot of reasons, just illustrating that he's really, really great cerebral brain.
It's actually something that Sam Presti said about Usman Dieng, but I think it applies here to J-Dub. It's not going to get any easier once they've gotten to the NBA. So the Thunder is really trying to identify human beings that have shown the ability to break through adversity and to be able to withstand that adversity, to hang in there, to stay with the fight, and staying through. I mean, as we talked about, staying 3 years at Santa Clara and becoming the most actualized, realized version of himself to that point was really an impressive feat for a guy like J-Dub, who was still kind of finding himself as a person, still growing into his body over the course of that time. And that's also why I wanted to talk to Coach Sendek, Herb Sendek, and Jason Ludwig, who recruited J-Dub, which was cool for me because I actually grew up watching Herb Sendek's NC State teams when I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and got to see all those Tobacco Road rivalries. And so being able to connect with him and the coach that recruited J-Dub, got some really great stories about just how truly he was, J-Dub was kind of a diamond in the rough, was only recruited by 3 schools. Coach Ludwig probably wouldn't have even stayed at one of the AAU tournaments to watch J-Dub play if J-Dub's AAU coach hadn't literally jumped right in front of him and said, "You've got to watch my kid." So just go, so how these types of things happen. And then, later on a flight, Coach Ludwig turns to Herb Sendek and says, "We got to take this kid." And it was really just the shooting form, some of the skills that J-Dub had, even as a 6-footer. And then with the understanding that, hey, this guy was wearing a size 15 shoe. Yeah. He's gonna grow.
A lot of folks were anticipating, this guy's got a 6'11" wingspan. He's 6 feet tall. He's wearing a size 15 shoe. Surely.
Something is going to happen here.
And sure enough, it did. And it worked out great. And it led to quite the versatile player that we saw in Summer League. And this guy was playing just about every position, guarding just about every position out there on the floor, really showed every tool in his tool belt out there in Summer League.
Yeah, I mean, some of the block shots, some of the dunks that you're like, how did he get off the floor? I mean, how is he at the rim when he was just on the floor?
Seriously.
It's the combination of length. He's got the athleticism that we talked about, but he also has the ability to get to the right spots on the floor. I mean, there's something that is innate and instinctual about just being able to get to the spot on the floor, being able to work your matchup. And I think, this can be applied to really all walks of life, but when he was at Santa Clara, and this is something Chet Holmgren talked to us about because Chet with Gonzaga was also in the WCC. J-Dub was the top line of the scouting report for every team that was playing against Santa Clara. And, there's something to be said about having to do a little bit of everything, learning. You think about in our industry, if you work in the minor leagues, if you work as an intern in a certain department, you're doing everything. You're doing every aspect of the job. And I think there's part of that with J-Dub and his kind of rise at Santa Clara that, his freshman year, he got on the court because he was defending. He was asked to guard the opposing team's best perimeter player every single night. By the time his college career ended, he was the top line scorer every single night that opposing teams were putting their best defender on. And I think that trajectory is something that Coach Sendek talked about, this improvement trajectory. And I think that's something that the Thunder has identified too. Yeah,
you mentioned him being able to find the right spots. And the plays that pop into my head when I think of J-Dub during Summer League were all the backdoor opportunities that he had. And he really connected with Josh Giddey. And I think that pairing in particular of just like, a guy who is obviously an elite passer, but then you've got this guy, Jalen Williams, who sees the floor really well for his position. And obviously, having played the point guard position before, obviously plays a factor in how you see the floor, where you would want the ball or where you think the opening should be on the receiving end. And so I just go back to those plays. He's a very smart player. And you can see that he's reading the floor in the way that he would if he was a point guard, but from that wing position.
Well, I hope we haven't spoiled it too much because there's so much great detail in this feature, if I do say so myself. But I mean,
there is.
But he and the coaches that I talked to are the ones that really, were very forthcoming. And Paris, you obviously were able to get quite a bit of detail and just heart out of J-Dub in these pieces. So I think it's really cool to just get to know him a little bit better. So definitely would encourage you to read this on OKCThunder.com.
Thunder fans, you're really going to enjoy watching this guy play this year and get to know him and his personality too. Really cool guy, really awesome guy. And if we're talking about cool guys, let's talk about the Frenchman from the NBL.
Smooth Ooze.
Yes, Smooth Ooze. Yeah. This guy is, I love this story too. And it's just the fact that he's 19 years old and has come this far, shows the skill level that he has. And the runway that he has, the growth opportunity, the potential ahead of him, it's really it really piques your radar.
Yeah, I mean, this is a kid that really has gotten a glimpse of professional basketball since he was 4 years old. As you mentioned, his father, Ababakar, moved from Senegal to France, played in the third division in France. And Usman was like in the gym with him every day.
Right.
Well, over the course of, and we'll talk about how he got to this journey, but I think what's fascinating is that Usman got to the point where he's playing in the same third division in France that his father was playing in. And instead of staying in this comfort zone where he's close by to his family, he takes on at the time which was the biggest challenge that he could probably take on at that time, which is moving himself all the way across the world to New Zealand to play in Australia's NBL. And he didn't even get a chance to play in New Zealand because of the COVID-19 pandemic. He ended up having to be in Melbourne for the entirety of the one season that he was there. But once again, kind of on the same theme that we were talking about with J-Dub, Usman is a kid that has really shown some nice promise of being able to take on a challenge and persevere through it.
Yeah. And if we're talking about similarities between these two, another one is the growth spurt aspect of it. And every guy goes through this at some point, but like he was saying, and my favorite part of this interview was, I was talking about the growth spurt, and he was like, yeah, I grew about 15 centimeters in 1 year.
You're doing
nodding my head and like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. What is 6? Okay. Yeah. So that's 6 inches, basically, roughly, in about 1 year. And this was after the Thunder first got eyes on him, right? The Thunder got eyes on him at 16 years old when he was 6 inches shorter and he was still, playing mainly guard position. He had all the guard skills. He's obviously very young. But then by the time that he moved to New Zealand or, to play for New Zealand, he had grown into this much taller player, but kept all of those guard skills, which made him such an intriguing prospect.
Yeah, I mean, 6'10", there's just not that many guys that come around that are 6'10", and I think that's why such a big part of the story is actually from Sam Presti, the Thunder general manager's standpoint, of seeing this guy at 16 years old that you mentioned, and getting to watch how he grew into his body, some of those initial skills that he had, and then how does he transfer those when things got tough? You know, when he got to the NBL, the first half of the season did not go well for him. You know, he didn't get to the free throw line very much. He didn't shoot it very well. I actually learned some details just about how the coaching staff of the New Zealand Breakers had to literally pull him away from the court during some portions of that first year because he was just working so hard. He was spending so much time working and focusing. Well, the last half of the season, he just was really able to break through. Averages over 13 points a game on good, really solid shooting splits, like 48% from the field, I think 36% from three, and added some rebounding in there as well. So as we ended up seeing during Summer League, he was able to kind of use a lot of those different skills that he had developed from a young age and transport them onto the floor in a smooth way. I
want to talk about this element because there's obviously the on-court element of, you know, playing in the NBL and your high-level opponents. This is the top league in Australia, right? And New Zealand. But he's 18 years old and moved halfway across the country, but that wasn't even the first time that he did that, right? Like he left home at 13 or 14 years old to go away and play and pursue his career. And then he went to INSEP after that. And so it's like he followed the same trajectory that we've seen a lot of the current guys on our roster go through, which is leaving home at a young age to go pursue their basketball career, and then learning how that experience, leaving home, being on your own, having to adult by yourself for the first time, how that has translated into kind of the poise, the character that we see in them today.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this with Alexei Pokusevski. We've talked about this with Vít Krejci. We've I mean, especially the European kids, Teo, like there's a massive family sacrifice that gets made that, and I can't imagine, you know, you started playing AAU when you were, you know, around that age, but that was weekend trips that your parents drove with you.
Oh, my mom brought apples and yogurt.
This was not Vít Krejci moving from Strakonica, Czech Republic to Spain, Valencia. I mean, this is not, you know, moving 6 hours away or whatever it was for Usman in France. And then just a few years after that, again, picking up and moving all the way across the world in the middle of a global pandemic.
Right.
Like that takes some guts and some courage and some level of family sacrifice that we are pushing all the chips in the middle of this table, that basketball is this guy's life.
Right.
And, you know, for better and for worse, I'm sure there are some things that were very challenging for Usman, but he persevered through all of them.
Yeah.
And he got himself to the point where he's the 11th pick in the NBA draft.
And I only have to believe his family is nothing but ecstatic because of that. And that explains why that anecdote you just brought up of we had to drag him off the court. Like, Usman, you gotta stop working for a second. Like that explains a lot of that, right? Because there's so much riding on that decision and you've got to make the most of the opportunity when it's in front of you. And so I could see the motivation behind that and why he would be in the gym for so long. Another element to Usman that I want to talk about in his story is INSEP. We have to talk about INSEP. And for those listening, INSEP is France's National Institute of Sport, Expertise, and Performance. So it's basically a top-tier Olympic, Paralympic training facility. You can also go to school at the same time. So this is right outside of Paris. We've had several Thunder players come through the INSEP ranks, and Teo Maledon is one of them.
Right.
I am so fascinated by this institute. I want to see it for myself. I want to learn all about it because obviously it produces top tier talent.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing French players emerge from this institute, and you know, I think it's part of a global trend of basketball academies. It's you know, you can think of it as, you know, a feeder to the professional teams that exist in France. It was a feeder to the team that that Usman ended up playing on. And you can see that the Thunder has leaned into this sort of development feeder culture with the OKC Blue. It's been one of the most foremost kind of front-running NBA teams to utilize the G League the way that it has. I mean, I
Right.
can't think of a time last season where the Thunder didn't have the maximum 3 players assigned to the OKC
Yep.
Blue to be able to get those extra minutes. And I think just thinking from that vantage point, there's a reason why the Thunder front office would really be drawn to this type of institute in France. Not only are they producing very, very talented players, and French basketball has long been known as one of the most, beautiful styles of play, where you're just getting players that come over to the United States that are changing the game, changing the NBA game. And so I think that the developmental culture of that is so crucial. And I think it's why, I can't think of a player that is more of a developmental player than Usman Dieng. I mean, this is a very, very long runway player. It's a long play. He is not going to be necessarily on the exact same timeline as some of the rest of the Thunder players, even some of the rest of the guys that were in his draft class.
Yeah.
And that's all okay and all part of the plan, because the Thunder is set up in sort of the similar context of, this is why we have multiple avenues to get experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels between the development that we saw from Usman and what he had to go through in France to what the Thunder is trying to do here in Oklahoma City in terms of utilizing every resource possible and making sure the guys maximize their potential as best as they can. And when Usman was an INSEP, he pointed out, like, they went to school in the morning, right, for a few hours in the morning. Then they would practice for a couple hours. Then they'd go back to school, and then they'd come back to the gym and practice. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, like, that sounds awesome, right? Like,
you're just whole life.
Eat,
it's like
sleep, and breathe basketball, and then school in between there. Like, it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I'm imagining sort of like basketball Hogwarts.
Yes,
you're
that's
just
exactly
like,
what I had in
You're
mind.
just like living in this castle, in this
Yes.
French castle that's like, okay, well, we got basketball, and then we're going to do class, and then we're going to go eat, and then we're going to do basketball.
Yes,
again.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this entire culture is centered around making sure that you are performing at your best, and every resource at your disposal is helping you in your training so that you can reach your potential. I just find it very fascinating. And of course, we've had a couple of players on the Thunder roster go through the ranks. So now I'm just really curious about it. And I looked up the website. It looks awesome. Like, the facilities, all of that looks really cool.
What are their age requirements? Are you thinking about applying?
I think I actually missed the mark last year.
Sorry, Paris.
It's okay. It's all right. I'll go visit it on my own time. But anyway.
We'll get you to Paris some other way.
Exactly. Get Paris to Paris. Operation Get Paris to Paris. So let's talk about Usman now in Summer League. Because we obviously saw him in action for several games. And Cameron Woods, the head coach of the Thunder's Summer League roster, pointed out that Usman was probably one of the players who improved the most over that time span. And it wasn't necessarily in terms of the numbers, the stats, the things that are very tangible. There's a lot of the intangible stuff, right? Usman's he's used to going up against grown men. Yeah. He's used to playing the professional pace of basketball. He's done that before. But obviously coming to the United States, different, vernacular, different language.
Different talent level.
Different talent level, different levels of physicality. There was some adjusting that needed to happen. And over the course of Summer League, you could really, like, if you went back and you watched the first Summer League game to the last one, or the last one that Usman played, you would see his aggression level increase with each and every game. And that's what the Thunder was looking for.
I think that this can certainly be attributed to the sort of embrace that his veteran teammates had around him. I think having all of those guys courtside that came just to watch Summer League was huge for him. I think the fact that you have Josh Giddey talking about, like, oh yeah, I watched Usman play in the Australian NBL. First of all, Josh, we were on all the same flights last year. How did you have time to be watching Usman Dieng and the New Zealand Breakers playing? I don't know. We'll have to chat about that.
Replays, Callum.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Highlights.
Maybe. But anyway, I think that type of open embrace, that type of support system that Usman's going to have with the Thunder, I think, and that he did have in those 2 weeks, 10 days over the course of Summer League, is really what helped that confidence spring forward. The fact that he was like a little bit more sure of himself on those pass, shoot, drive decisions. That's only going to continue to be a factor over the next few years as he continues to develop and hit that timing and be a little bit more of who he can be at this level.
You could tell that everybody on that roster knew what he was capable of and knew what he brought to the table. There was no blinking of an eye if, he didn't score, a certain amount of points or have a bunch of stats. It was like, we know what Usman can bring to the table, and we're going to keep feeding him and keep, putting him in these positions. And if you watch him out there on the floor, the thing that stands out to me the most is just he does not get rushed. He plays with that kind of that confidence, the same kind of pace and tempo, even keeled, that is way beyond his 19 years old, in my opinion, especially for a guy who is stepping onto an NBA floor for the first time. It's pretty rare to see.
Just to tie back to J-Dub, that's literally what he said, and I thought that this was the height of comedy. The 21-year-old is saying, it's rare to see that type of smoothness and pace from a 19-year-old. And I was like,
that was you.
Takes one to know one. Yeah. I mean, that was you a couple years ago, J-Dub. But I do think the point is extremely valid that there is a level of quiet confidence that Usman has. And right now, it's just about chipping away. It's just knocking that hammer, one nail at a time. And, we'll see how he turns out over the course of the next few years. But that's why the way that the Thunder has gone about this, to be able to invest in a variety of different players on a variety of different timelines, it is so encouraging and exciting if you're a Thunder fan, because you can invest emotionally in all of these guys because some of them are going to pop, some of them are going to earn the right to be long-term Thunder players, and it's just really exciting to see.
And thank you for reminding everybody that this guy's 19 years old. He's a teenager. He doesn't turn 20 until May.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he just turned 19.
Exactly. So there is a lot of room for growth for not just him, but really every guy on this roster. This is going to be the youngest team in the NBA again this year, which is cause for a lot of excitement because we've seen some great stuff, and these guys are clearly putting in the work.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and so I think for us, as we're covering the team, we'd be doing a disservice to the fans if we're tracking their progress like from a day-to-day standpoint and tracking it more month to month, year over year, the way that we've been doing with a guy like Alexei Pokusevski, right? Like, this is a guy that if you look clearly from when he was drafted in, I think it was like November of 2020 to now, he's a completely different player.
Right.
And I think that hopefully we've done a good job of contextualizing, sort of the before and the after. Same with a guy like Darius Bazley. You look at Baze, you look at some of the things that he's doing on the floor back when he first started with this team, when he was like a very, very bit player on a playoff team, to where he is now, and all the plethora of things that he's able to accomplish in one NBA game is fascinating. I think same can be said of Poku, and I think that's the type of framework that all of us have to keep in mind when we think about Usman, is like, not where is he next week compared to this past week.
Right.
Summer League was a nice little terrarium to see that type of growth. What we're really going to be looking at is the long play of the full year.
Exactly. And he's in the perfect system and organization to be able to grow and develop. We've got blueprints of other guys who have gone through this and maximized the opportunity here with the Thunder, the resources, and like you mentioned earlier, the time with the OKC Blue, like guys really utilizing the G League and all the resources. And as we know, the Thunder is great with developing its players. So, and if you haven't read the other feature stories on J-Dub and Usman and even J. Will, I urge you to go to OKCThunder.com and go check those out. There's also videos that go with those as well. They are online right now. But until then, we want to thank you so much for watching and listening. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much to our producer, Matt Bishop. And until next time, Thunder up and catch you later.